We're back. So in this lesson, we're going to discuss the eraser tool options in Adobe Illustrator. So let's first take a look at what options we have, and then we are going to work on these options to figure out what they do for each one. So in your panel, your sixth icon down, second column, sixth row, you'll find the eraser tool. Or if you have it in a single column layout, it will be the 12th icon. When you click this and you hold down, you'll notice you have eraser tool, scissor tool, and knife. And each has a shortcut except for the knife tool. Eraser tool is Shift and E, the scissor tool is C, and then you have the knife tool. So we're going to create the two things that these can work on in Adobe Illustrator. There are strokes and there are fills. So we're going to pretend like we are both starting this from scratch and we have no idea what's going to happen. So I'm going to create a stroke and a fill for each option. We have three options. We have the eraser, the scissor, and the knife. So we want to make sure we can see what each one does. So let's create three instances. And let me change the size of this artboard so that way it's a little bit larger. And if you need to learn how to change the size of the artboard or adjust it, there's a tutorial on artboard options, and you can figure that out from there. So now we have three instances on our artboard, and I'm going to change the colors for each so they don't get confused with one another. Let's say we make this red, right? Red works. Yep. I think that differentiates it enough, don't you? Okay, so now what we'll do is we will select the eraser tool. And we will click on a point over our first fill, and let's drag through that fill any direction we want, and then let go. What you'll notice is it cut the fill into the segments that were on opposite sides of where the actual eraser tool went. So if we were to select that tool again, and let's say we go from here to here, notice how it only went through this portion. And the reason why is because this happened to have been selected at the time. So let's say we only select this, and we try to erase through both of these. Even though we see the line go through both, it will only affect the area that's selected. So you have the option of using the eraser tool and going through a shape in its entirety, or selecting a portion, like let's say we selected these two, and we cut through, it will only cut through the area of the pieces that are selected. Now, let's see what happens when we apply that to a stroke. It cuts the stroke into sections. And let's see what happens if we go over in different areas, and you'll notice that it continues to cut the stroke. But unlike the fill, it simply cuts it straight up and down. So basically what it does is it creates different points where the line becomes segmented and separated. It doesn't cut at an angle simply because it's a stroke and it's not a fill. It has to cut perpendicular to the actual line itself. Alright, so let's say we cut multiple ways through here, and you'll notice we get multiple cuts. Same way as before. Or if we select, let's say, this, and we cut through here and here and here and there, notice we only get the cuts on these two parts. Pretty much how we anticipated it. Okay? Now, let's you know what? Let's go back just for a second. If we were to double click on our eraser tool, We can open our eraser tool options and we can change the actual angle of our eraser tool. And this mainly works on the fills. Again, the strokes are just going to get cut perpendicular. We can change the roundness, and we could also change the overall size. Now in our options over here, these drop down boxes, we're able to change this if we have, let's say, a tablet and we're using a pen stylus. We can change the actual angle to random. We can change, and this can just be by itself as we're dragging it along. We can have the angle change randomly. Or if we have a pen tablet, we can use pressure sensitive. We can use the stylus wheel. We can use the tilt of the pen, the bearing, and the rotation itself. And then when we have something like this selected, we can change the variation. So if you look in our little update box, you'll notice that the variation changes. Essentially, it means that these are the type of variations that we will get as we're using it in terms of our angle. The same thing goes for roundness and for size. Our roundness and our size will vary the same way depending upon the options that we pick, and these are all relative to what actual tool we're using to select them. So I'm going to cancel this out because I want to keep our default option anyway. And we're going to move on to our next tool. And our next tool is the scissors tool. Now if we were to use this tool here, the only thing we can do is we can go to points on our fill on the border and we can click to cut those points. And that allows us to remove the shapes. And what it does is from the point on our fill to the exact opposite point, it will create a straight line. So let's do this again. Let's say we select our fill. Let's say we select this point here, and let's say we select this point here. It is essentially created three shapes. Now here's the issue. This may look like it's an actual point, but this is an open shape. It's not actually a closed path. So in order to close it, we would have to click on the point that's open and then click, as you can see, to close it using our pen tool. If you're not aware of how to do this, we have a pen tool tutorial as well. So we can click on our open point and we pass through and we click on our other open point to close our points. Alright? Or we can click on an open point, continue to click other points, and make a new shape from it. But that's what the scissor tool does to actual filled shapes. Now, you can tell when a shape is open by when you highlight it, and let's say we drag this. You'll notice it's only showing us two sides of it. It's not showing us the hypotenuse of the actual angle. So we're only getting those two sides, which means this is open, which means, again, we can click here, and then we can click here to close it. If we were to use that tool on a stroke or a line segment, what it does is similar to how the eraser tool does. It gives you segmented points, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't automatically put a space between them like the eraser tool did. So let's say we select this, we then get perfect cuts that are right along the edges of one another. So this is perfectly aligned there. We can, let's say we highlight this one, pull that there, and so on and so forth down the line. But it cuts it at those particular points. Same thing again, we can reconnect those points if we choose to make new points along our line segment. Alright, so that's how we would work with the scissor tool. And then our last tool is the actual knife tool. And we can go down to this, and let's say we click and we start to cut through. You'll notice the knife tool does what the eraser tool does, but it does it more like the actual scissor tool. So we can cut through a path and create two separate paths or shapes, but they're actually connected to one another. It doesn't see them with a split and open space that's the size of our actual eraser. So it works like the scissor tool on the fills, except it cuts through completely. So let's select our knife again, and let's go part or partially through our tool. And you'll notice when we're doing this, it will cut a line segment in that area, creating 2 points from the top where it intersects, but creating an anchor point in the middle area. Okay, so that's what our knife tool does for fills. Now we'll see what it does for strokes. Take our knife tool, cut through, what happens? I'm just doing this over and over so you guys can see. Absolutely nothing happens. It has no effect on this actual shape itself. But let's see also what it might do if it's a closed path and we cut through. Even if it's a closed path and it's just strokes, it still creates two separate shapes. Let's say we go and we don't cut fully through with the knife tool. It does what it did prior to our regular shape, and it creates a cut open point here, and then it creates an end point or an anchor point midway through the shape. It just gives it another form. And essentially that's how our three tools work. The eraser tool, again, it will cut through, and it will cut through only selected parts that you select. But unless it's a fill, when it's on a line segment or a stroke, it will only cut perpendicular and erase those parts that are in the size of the actual eraser brush. If you were to use the scissor tool, it would cut, but it would leave open fill or open paths in doing so. And then the same thing would happen as it did for the eraser tool, but in cutting a line segment, it would actually leave them close together where there's no space depending on the size of the actual tool being used, because it's clicking a point and cutting it. The actual knife tool is very similar to the eraser tool with a combination of the scissor tool, except it doesn't leave your paths open. It cuts them so that they're clean shapes that are closed, and it separates them. But there's no spot in between the two of the shapes like there is with the eraser tool. It keeps them close to one another, so it appears as if there isn't any cut at all. You can see as you get in closer that there's a slight jagged edge that represents where it was cut. And for the line segment, if it is a regular line segment, unlike the scissor tool, it will not cut through it. It has to be a closed path. Once it's a closed path, it can cut through and make multiple shapes, or it can cut through slightly and then make a dent in the shape, which you can then adjust and change. So that's how you use your eraser tool options in Adobe Illustrator. If you're not familiar with how to manipulate those with the pen tool, again, there's a pen tool tutorial that you can go and check out, and advanced pen tool techniques. So take a look at those. When you get an opportunity, get familiar with them, come back to this, play around with this, and once you're comfortable with it, then you can move forward with some of the other tutorials. So I look forward to seeing you in the next one.